This podcast is brought to you by the National Fallen Firefighters Foundation. Their mission is to honor America's fallen fire heroes, support their families, colleagues, and organizations, and work to reduce preventable firefighter death and injury. Learn more at firehero.org.
Hi, Chris McClune here with Fire Apparatus and Emergency Equipment. Welcome to this episode of our podcast. We're going to be talking about water delivery today. And as we often get into with my two guests, Andy Saccodato and Bill Atkins, we'll be talking about it from the rural perspective. We'll also be talking a little bit about what Andy and Bill saw at FDIC that impressed them while they were there. And right before FDIC and right after FDIC, we hit it in the March issue of Fire Apparatus and Emergency Equipment, and then we hit it in the May issue. It was a two-part series. Andy and Bill authored an article, that we made into two parts, covering essential equipment that any fire company expected to deliver water in a rural setting should have. It was a pretty exhaustive list. I mean, we had to break it up into two pieces. So, I mean, it was a pretty decent list. So, Andy and Bill, welcome back. I want to jump right into this. In fact, the last time we saw each other was at FDIC, and we were in the podcast studio there. So now we're back to three different screens here. But I want to jump right into it. And when we think about the article that you both authored, it was a pretty comprehensive list. And you know, when we talk about this essential equipment, some might think that it is an exhaustive list to the extent that it's going to be hard to acquire all this equipment without some serious expense. So, how easy, Andy? I'll start with you. How easy is it to get the equipment that we're going to be talking about today? Is it really? Is this stuff that say a rural fire department with a pretty limited budget, or is this stuff that they're going to be able to get as well?
Well, absolutely. I think the biggest thing is, if any of the readers went through our article and think that they have to have everything on that list or else they're failing, that really wasn't the intention of the article. Really, what I would recommend to anybody that is reading that article or has read that article or is going to read that article, to kind of just think about and prioritize certain things. There are things that I would definitely put higher on my priority list, that when it comes to expenses, that I would make sure those are the first things that I purchase for my department. And then there are other things that are niceties, I would say. But I think it is possible through budgeting to get everything on that list, while it may not be an overnight acquisition. And then it's also important, there were things in that list that we talked about that only cost a couple dollars that can really make a huge difference on your pumper, like the sealants we talk about, duct tape, saran wrap, stuff like that can have a huge impact. So that list really ran the gambit of expensive items like intake valves that might take a little bit more capital up front, to stuff that, hey, you know what, we can go to the Walmart and pick up a couple of these things for each of the rig and be ready to rock and roll.
Bill, how about you?
Yeah, I agree with Andy wholeheartedly there. A lot of it comes down to the system that you use and the resources that you have in your mutual aid company departments. You don't need to buy everything that we talked about. If you're using a nurse tanker system, you need the equipment you needed for that system. If you're doing the roll hitch, you're gonna want those clappered Siamese valves. You may not need everything on that list, but what we provided was just a good list for pretty much any rural water solution.
So there are things that automatically come to mind at least when I think of a drafting operation. I wanted to talk about a couple of those things before we get into, basically your essential list, Andy, and your essential list, Bill. And one of those things is strainers. I think back to when I took my first pump operations class, and this is going back many, many years. Probably 25 years ago. Where, one of the skill stations was, hooking up a strainer and doing all that stuff. But that, because of where I am, and because I don't do a lot of drafting, that was really the last time I saw a strainer. But when we talk about strainers, there are a lot of different things to consider and a lot of different types that are out there. So, Bill, could you take me through just some of those different types, and then Andy, you can pick it up from where he leaves off?
Yeah, when it comes to types, not talking about manufacturers, but there's a floating strainer, and then there's a low profile strainer, and then you got the barrel strainer. Barrel strainers usually come with the apparatus when you buy them. They're great for getting the max flow for your apparatus. But if you use just a barrel strainer, you have to do things to keep it off of the ground. If you're using a lake or a pond, we don't want to suck up that sediment, or we don't want that to go into the pump. So you may need to take a ladder and stick that into the water to make it, make a bend to where it doesn't sit on the ground. And if you use the barrel strainer in a dump tank, you're not going to be able to get all of your water out of, or the majority of your water out of there. You're going to start, sucking in air instead of getting your max flow. So a low profile strainer works really great for a dump tank or a pool of some type. So just remember that all strainers are not created equal. There is a vast difference in the cheapest strainer you can buy to the most expensive strainer you can buy, and we're talking almost 1,000 gallons a minute difference. So do your homework on your strainers when you go to purchase one, and get what best suits your department.
Andy, anything to add?
Yeah, absolutely. Bill hit the nail on the head. Really, we can go down and get really, really technical. There are all kinds of strainers for all kinds of applications, like Bill said. Floating strainers are great because, like Bill said, you don't have to tie your ground ladder, run your hard sleeve through your ground ladder or rest it on a ground ladder or anything like that. It just floats on the surface of the water and it pulls from the top. The major disadvantage to that is typically when they're used, those types of strainers, they affect your flow, right? You don't get the same volume of water that a barrel strainer would get when you use those floating strainers. What I like to do to kind of combat that is I kind of make a homemade floating strainer. And what I usually will do is I'll take an empty foam jug that I carry on the apparatus and a carabiner, and I'll just clip that to my regular old barrel strainer. And now I just throw that in the water, and now have created a really cheap floating strainer that still gets the flow benefits of your barrel strainer. And it typically prevents me from having to screw around with a ground ladder or tuck it through the rungs and stuff like that. So to me, it's the best of both worlds in that instance. There are manufacturers, without naming names, that have tried to create an all-in-one encompassing strainer that has the low-level ability for dump tanks, has the floating ability for static bodies of water, and the like. The only problem that I have encountered with that is, in order for that float mechanism to work ideally, it requires 18 inches of depth in your source. Otherwise, if it's shallower than that, what ends up happening is when you push it into like a lake or something like that, even though it has a float attached, the low level portion will actually end up digging into the water, or the bottom of the source, and you're jamming mud and muck and all kinds of stuff into your strainer. So while that's an option for a department that might be looking to try and only carry one strainer that can do everything, just understand, right? The problem with a Swiss Army knife is, the fork and the knife are on the opposite ends, right? That old adage. So it comes with its own set of disadvantages. But I really do recommend if I'm trying to, cover all of my bases and trying to figure out what strainers I should carry on my rig, I like to carry at least a barrel strainer with an empty foam jug somewhere on the rig and a low level strainer to be able to operate out of a dump tank. That kind of covers all of my bases. Areas that do a lot of stuff out of mucky, shallower bodies of water, flowing bodies of water, you might want to consider purchasing something called a box strainer. And a box strainer is designed to sit on the bottom of the source, but the strainer is pointed upwards and it pulls water from the top. So that way I can put it in a source that has sediment or junk, and I don't have to worry about that coming into the pump. I would not do that with a low-level strainer, and I would not do that with a barrel strainer because I'm going to have some issues with clogging later on.
Now, another thing that I always think of whenever I think about drafting is the hard sleeve. It has been a number of years since my fire company has carried any hard sleeve to speak of. But again, that's because of the area that we cover. We're well hydranted there. But when I think of hard sleeve, most of the time I'm thinking of the classic two of them mounted on one side, kind of up high. And that's all we carried back in the day, and that's all many do carry. But there are a number of different directions that you can go with hard sleeve. And you in the article mentioned some of those ways. I guess, Andy, could you just talk about some of the different directions you can go with hard sleeve in terms of how many you carry, things of that nature, and then is there a rule of thumb that you go by whenever it comes to speccing hard sleeve for a rig?
Yeah, absolutely. So I like to tell people that hard sleeve is definitely the hottest commodity on the rural fire ground. You have the least amount of it. It's a one tool that we definitely need for both the dump site and the fill site, and we usually don't have a lot of it. So we have to be really, really mindful of how we use it. Now, Chris, you mentioned that older rigs, typically you only carry 2 sections of hard sleeve. And a lot of people wonder why that is, where that comes from. So the previous edition of NFPA 1901, the old edition, stated that a pumper had to carry at least 20 feet of hard sleeve, or it's either 10 or 15 feet of soft suction hose for your suction hose requirement. The new 1901 standard does some weird things with recommending minimum equipment allowances and stuff like that. But a lot of people still consider 20 feet as the go-to number. Now, where does that 20 feet come from? Well, if you look a little bit further, the NFPA requirements for pump capacity testing, you have to be able to meet your pump capacity with no more than 20 feet of hard sleeve connected to the pump intake. And depending on the pump size, you may have to use multiple intakes, but you have 20 feet connected to each intake that you're using. So a lot of people think that you got to carry 20 feet for those reasons. And then there's the obvious reason that a lot of people think that 20 is the max that you carry, is because you can't really vertically draft much more than 20 feet. 25 feet is considered the maximum lift that I can be above my water source before you're not going to get anything. Now, what a lot of people forget is that horizontally speaking, I can draft through way more than 20 feet. And in some trainings, I've drafted through 100 plus feet of 6-inch hard sleeve that was horizontal with minimal lift, maybe only a couple feet, 2-3 feet of lift between the source and the pumper. So the question becomes, how much do I really need to be carrying on my pumper? I like to tell folks that for departments that routinely operate in the rural environment, do a lot of drafting, I want to try and be as self-sufficient as I can be. And in order to do that, I like to try and carry 40 to 50 feet of hard sleeve on my rural pumpers. It sounds like a lot. And in some cases it is, depending on how you spec your rig. So one simple thing that you can do, and we talked about this in the article, is traditionally a lot of pumpers keep the hard sleeve in racks on the driver officer side above the compartments. Well, one way that you can get a little bit extra sleeve is you can spec double racks. So now you can have 20 feet on one side, 20 feet on the other side. There's your 40. Something that we did, and we stole it from departments up in Maryland, and I originally stole it from the city of Chicago. If you look at older pictures of their rigs, Chicago was carrying hard sleeve on the cab roof of the apparatus. So in Charlottesville, when we were changing our specs, we went with a flat cab roof and we carried our hard sleeve on the roof of the apparatus, because for the city, we weren't using hard sleeve all that much. We were still carrying it, and it wasn't in our way, right? It wasn't in our way for the day-to-day things that we needed on the apparatus. So those are some easy ways to carry more than just your regular 20 foot of hard sleeve. Something else that I would really, really urge listeners to consider is carry a lot of hard sleeve on your tankers or your tenders, depending on whatever you call it from wherever you are, right? I consider a tanker or a tender a piece of equipment that supplements the pumping apparatus. Their job is to supplement by bringing water and by bringing equipment. And I can help those engine companies by carrying a lot of hard sleeve. I like to look at tankers, and I see sometimes a lot of wasted space on the bodies, right? Where you could be stacking a bunch of hard sleeve to be able to already, supplement your engine companies that are operating from a draft. There's a lot of wasted space on some tankers that could be carrying hard sleeve. And my final recommendation is, even if the tanker has a smaller pump on it or no pump, sometimes, and this is the weird part of the standard, where a 750 GPM pump or 1000 GPM pump, you can get 5-inch threads on the intake. And according to the standard, 5-inch hard sleeve can flow between 750 and 1,000 gallons a minute to meet those pump capacities. So you might buy that truck that has 5-inch threads because it's cheaper, and then it shows up with 5-inch hard sleeve, but everything else in your fleet is running 6-inch hard sleeve. So now it's bringing hard sleeve that you can't use without adapters and is going to restrict flow. So even if you have an intake on your tanker that has 5-inch inlets, what I would recommend is absolutely carry 6-inch hard sleeve on the truck, because that way it can supplement your pumpers that are going to probably be using 6-inch hard sleeve anyway.
Now, Bill, what about you? You come at this, from an environment where your job is with a very well hydranted area. Then you go to your volunteer side, and that's more rural. What have you come to learn over the years of working with hard sleeve? Any rules of thumb you can pass on?
Yeah, just the fact that, like what Andy said, pumpers just don't carry enough. And for years, I always thought that you couldn't draft over that 20 feet, whether it be vertical or horizontal, and that's not true. So because we always carried 20 on each apparatus, we made that our limitation. And firefighters and operators need to understand that is not the limitation. If you're on a level ground and your pond or lake is, you can only get 100 feet away from it, you still can use that source. Don't skip that source because you feel that it's too far away. Andy's class, it does go over very in depth on the lift. That is the main piece for not being able to use that source. But horizontally, we can reach to 100 feet, 100 feet easy. And I've learned that over the years. Talking about space, like what Andy was mentioning, it doesn't really take up any of your compartment space. You can still have the same compartment space, and then using that hard suction, like what Andy said, on top of on the cab, or creating these other racks to add more to it. But yeah, that was my big piece on hard suction is, and 5-inch is a lot more friction loss than there is with 6-inch, or considerably, especially when you're trying to reach those long distances. So the 6 inches is what I would recommend, even if you do have a 5-inch steamer.
I'll throw this out to both of you. When I think of hard sleeve, I think of the heavy, black rubber, hard sleeve. But there's also more. I don't want to call it plastic, but it's a
Lightweight.
it's sort of like it looks ribbed as it goes on. And is that also considered hard sleeve, or would you consider that something different? Just so people kind of understand, what's out there and what's available.
It's still hard sleeve. It is smooth on the inside, so it's got a little bit of ridge to it, but it's a lot lighter weight. Because if we had 6-inch with that old rubber stuff, I mean, it's quite heavy. But most of it's just becoming more lightweight. That's pretty much all the difference is. Still does the same thing.
Yeah, one thing I just want to add to this hard sleeve discussion is, I really want to make sure listeners understand that we're not advocating that you're routinely going to have to draft through 100 foot of hard sleeve. Can you do it? Sure, certainly you can. But, I want 50 feet of sleeve on my pumper because I can set up a very simple dump site at a rural fire and chew through 50 feet of hard sleeve very quickly. Depending on how I position, if I have a front intake on my rig or not, if I have the dump tank in front of the pumper, I might need 20 feet of hard sleeve just to get into the dump tank if the tank is in front of the engine and I'm trying to keep a lane of traffic open for tankers to offload. Then I factor in the fact that I'm hopefully going to be putting more than one tank down and have to transfer water between using jet siphon devices and stuff like that. That needs hard sleeve in order to transfer water. So it is not uncommon for a fairly simple dump site to use between 40 and 50 feet of sleeve for all aspects, not necessarily just reaching the water. It could be for a single intake and some transfer, or it could be a twin tube and, 2 transfer lines, right? We can get really, really crazy for those larger incidents and those higher flows and need a lot of hard sleeve just to be able to do transfer water from a couple different places.
So we these last two discussion points have been just, some of the things that I think of when that are common when I think of drafting. But, the real purpose of today's topic was to get into, your essential equipment that you guys, Andy, you touched on yours way back in the beginning there. But Bill, I'll start with you. If you were building something from scratch today, what are the essential pieces of equipment you would be looking to add, for rural water delivery? If that is your engine company or tender company's primary responsibility.
Okay. Yeah. Well, the system that we use here at Fayetteville is the nurse tanker system, which uses minimal of the equipment. It doesn't require a whole lot of appliances. We want a intake valve on the apparatus. We want the strainers, the hard sleeve, and then supply line. Because we push water from one to the other, and then dump tanks. Those are pretty much all we need for our rural water development. But if you're using things like the rural hitch, where you may need a double clappered Siamese or some type of water manifold, if you have the manpower to put someone on that valve, the close and open valves, you can use that. But those are the things that we mainly look at for our operation: is the hard sleeve, the strainer that's going to get the most flow, and then dump tanks. And we try to put, for the most part, we use just one dump tank. And then there's some smaller fires we don't use a dump tank at all. But if it's larger fire, we want to use at least 2 dump tanks so that we can keep the tankers, dumping and going back to the fill site. We don't want to see tankers have to sit still. They should be moving at all times.
Andy, how about you? Your essential list?
Yeah, so my essentials, we kind of already hit on some of them. Hard sleeve is one of them. Lots of hard sleeve, and we've talked about it in other podcasts and articles and stuff. But intake valves are really, really important. Having an intake valve on your pumper to be able to control the flow of water into and out of the pump, that's critical. That is, to me, if I'm looking through the list that Bill and I put together in that article, probably, and I don't have intake valves on my truck, that would be my number one priority to spend money on, right? To get intake valves, to be able to control the flow of water into my pump. Now, on the more cost-effective side of things, my essential equipment that I want on my rural engine that doesn't really cost a lot of money at all, a tool called a chafing block, and we talked about this in the article. A chafing block is essentially just a 3/4 inch piece of plywood that's cut in an hourglass shape, and I can use it for a lot of different things. The original intent of the chafing block is to lift hose up to allow water to flow underneath or prevent rubbing, especially when we're using it on a hydrant, soft suction hose, and the vibration rubbing. The chafing block keeps it off the pavement, so that way we don't damage the hose. But what I love the chafing block for in the rural setting is when a single firefighter has to connect hard suction together. What the firefighter can do is they can take their chafing block and they can rest the hard sleeve on the edge of that chafing block, so that way the male threads is just hanging up here. Then they can go ahead and take the female end of the other hard sleeve, put it between their legs, and now they can clamp it with their shins, and they can use both hands to mate the two connections together and spin the hard sleeve together. That makes it really easy to put multiple sections together by yourself. And the last thing that I think is essential, and it's some people look at us a little crazy when they see us use it, but I actually got turned on to this by a mutual friend of Bill and mine, Keith Thomas. He works for the Columbus Fire Department in Ohio. He's been there for 30 years, but the mallet that they use up there is not a mallet; it's a bowling pin. And I have found after hanging out with Keith and teaching alongside him that the best mallet on the market is a bowling pin. For a couple different reasons. One, it's cheap. You can go to a bowling alley, and if you're in uniform, they might just give you some old bowling pins. But even if they don't, I bought 80 of them for like 25 cents a piece at my local bowling alley. But what I like about them is they're pretty ergonomical. When you actually hold it, and you're actually, I got one right here, right? You can hold it, and it really does make it easy to hit. And what I really like is even when I miss, I'm still hitting. All of this is hitting surface, so I'm still missing or still hitting. But the best part, because I'm usually clumsy on the rural fire scene, when that thing ends up falling in the dump tank or the water source, they float because they got a wooden core. So I can always get my pin back and go back to work. So cheap, simple, inexpensive, and they're durable. They're really durable.
So there are some areas, some departments. I can think of one very, very nearby where I am, where they've got municipal water, hydrants at one end of the district, but at the other end of the district, it's non-hydranted. And rigs have to be spec'd to serve both areas. And we've often talked. You mentioned the Swiss Army knife before. We've had podcasts on equipping rescue pumpers. We have a lot of these combination type rigs, and in some cases, in a way, we are combining a couple type of rigs with rigs that have to serve both a hydranted and non-hydranted area. And so for lack of a better term, for those companies, is there sort of like a light equipment cache that they should be carrying just to make sure that they can at least get things started before maybe I'm sure they would have probably some tankers on their mutual aid, but before those tankers get there, just to get kind of the ball rolling. Bill, I'll start with you on that one.
Yes, as far as equipment goes, with the little cache, I'd keep it as simple as possible. If you need that strainer, you need that hard suction, those basic pieces that we've talked about. Adapters are when mutual aid companies come in, they may not use the same exact fittings that we use. So we want to make sure we have a cache of that. I'm sorry, my phone going crazy here. But just keep little things like that. Be prepared for when that apparatus does show up. You have everything out and ready for them to ready to go for whatever operation you set up.
Andy, anything to add?
Yeah, I would say the only thing that I would add is if you have a department that's kind of dealing with both sources of water, more than likely, I would imagine they probably already have intake valves on their pumpers. One really helpful tip that I would recommend to folks that are looking at intake valves or trying to figure out what to set their rig up when they have to do both is heavily consider speccing those intake valves with 6-inch male threads. So that way, if you have to draft, you can just spin that hard sleeve right on. And then if you're doing hydrant work, leave a 6-inch female to 4-inch or 5-inch Storz adapter for your hydrant operations. It's a heck of a lot easier to use male threads and a bowling pin and tighten down that gasket and hard sleeve connection when I'm drafting, when I have male threads, compared to trying to draft through Storz fittings. I personally don't like to draft through Storz fittings. So like I've seen some fire departments that kind of do both. They'll have Storz fittings on their intake valve as a standard they ordered the intake valve with the Storz fitting. And now they use an adapter to connect their hard sleeve, or their hard sleeve has Storz fittings. I personally don't care for it because there's a couple things you got to think about. In order for the Storz setup to work, you have to make sure that you have the right type of gaskets in the connection. There's actually two types of Storz gaskets. There's a pressure gasket, which is smooth, and a drafting gasket, which has a rib on the outer edge that makes it airtight. So if you don't have the drafting gasket in there, you're never going to get an airtight seal. You're going to have air leaks the entire incident. You may never get a prime. They just tend to be a little bit more hateful, even if you get the connection made. So I personally like threaded connections because I can tighten them if I need to. And when it comes to operating off a hydrant, I just leave that one adapter on. I turn my quarter turn, and I'm good to go with my Storz fitting.
Something I'd like to
Now,
add
the one,
to that,
I'm sorry, go ahead, Bill.
Is you restrict flow when you're using a Storz fitting and compared to the 6-inch sleeve. It's going to be reduced down to that. It's actually less than 5 inches, closer to 4, instead of getting your max flow out of when you're using a Storz fitting.
Yeah, that's a great point.
It seems that just the security of really tightening that down with the bowling pin goes a long way as well, I think.
Well, it's funny because I've actually had, I don't like to get into these ego arguments and stuff, but we were teaching a class one time, and I actually had a student come up to me and say, well, my captain says, and that's always my favorite when somebody says my captain or my chief says, and they go, my captain says that if you need to take a mallet to a hard sleeve, you need to hit the gym, right? I don't have time for that macho man BS on a rural fireground, right? Like, I'm probably setting this up by myself. I need to make the connections and I need to go to work. So yes, I'm gonna beat the heck out of it, make sure it's airtight, and I'm gonna go. Because the last thing I want to do is be chasing air leaks. And a lot of people think that you're going to damage the gaskets in there. You're not going to damage the gaskets by tightening it. And even if you do, right, what people need to remember is that gaskets in hard sleeve, they're a replaceable part. They're not intended to last the life of the hard sleeve because they dry out over time and they need to be replaced. So at the end of the operation, regardless of what you're doing or what type of fitting you're using, it's my opinion that you really need to inspect your gaskets to make sure they're not cracked, they're not wore. But more importantly, there's not dirt and gravel and stuff like that that's gotten in there that's going to prevent a good seal from occurring. So there's some maintenance that we need to do when we're picking up to kind of prevent some of those problems as well.
Now, over the whole course of this conversation, we've talked about all these different things that you need, to get started, that you need, to have if you're going to be expected to do this on a regular basis. But nowhere have we said you need the newest rig with the biggest pump or anything like that. And I think that, it goes a long way in saying, we know there are rural departments that are cash strapped, that are still running rigs that some departments would have retired long ago. But if those rigs are kept up, if the maintenance is done on them, if the maintenance is done on the pumps, you can get the big water out of them just as much as you can with a rig that's rolling off the line today. So what would you tell those who are concerned that they have apparatus from, let's say, the mid 90s and are concerned about their capabilities? I mean, Andy, we see pictures that you're in all the time from these training evolutions that you do. These are not brand spanking new rigs that you're working with when you're instructing these companies. So what would you tell someone who's concerned that because their rig's a 95, with a 1500 GPM pump, that they're not going to be able to get, the big water that you're teaching them to get?
Yeah. So the biggest, to simplify this as much as I can, because we could probably talk about this for another hour, but the thing to understand is, in order to flow larger volumes, it's all about area, right? It's all about surface area. So the bigger the area on the intake side of the pump, the more water you can get in. The bigger the area on the discharge side of the pump, you get more water out. So some of these rigs, I was just in Lenoir City, Tennessee last week, and we had an 80s model Pierce Arrow that we were pumping, a 1250 GPM pump, and we were pumping 1500 GPM out of it, no problem. And the way we were able to do that is we were using two intakes. We were drafting through two intakes simultaneously, performing a twin tube drafting operation. Each of those intakes was primed individually at different points in the operation. But once both intakes were primed and rocking and rolling, the rig was able to discharge 1500 GPM, no problem at all. Now, the limiting factor there was we ran out of horsepower in that truck, right? And that's a good problem to have. I don't expect an 80s model pumper to have the horsepower that a newer engine has. But the moral of the story was that we were drafting through one intake, had 50 feet of hard sleeve going into the water. The other had 40 feet going into the water. And we were drafting and flowing. We were exceeding the pump's rated capacity by 250 gallons a minute by doing so. But there are some folks that, look at that and say, well, when will I ever have to flow that much water? And you might not have to. So I tell people that in the rural setting, a realistic goal to be able to expect and what you should be aiming for any rural drafting operation is 1,000 gallons a minute. That's what I want. That's what I am happy with. If I can get 1,000 GPM, I'm happy. And that's because if I'm drafting from a static source, a lake or something like that, right, I'm typically using that source to fill tankers, right? And I want to be filling tankers at 1,000 gallons a minute for peak efficiency. Bill talked about the efficiency earlier, right? The NFPA standard says that they have to be able to be filled at least 1,000 gallons a minute. So that's always my goal. At a dump site, my flow rates may exceed 1,000 gallons a minute on these larger flow fires. But if I have it in my head that I can twin and triple tube draft or get multiple dump site pumpers, right, I can flow those larger volumes of water. But my goal, right, I'm happy with any rig, regardless of age, when I'm dealing with a natural body of water that I'm using as a fill site. If I can get 1,000 gallons a minute, I'm happy. Anything else, anything over that, that's a bonus, right? That's a bonus. Now, I still may have to do a twin tube draft in order to get that 1,000 gallons a minute because of the horizontal reach or the lift, or I have nasty water that's going to clog my strainers and I want redundancy. But, and again, that goes back to our hard sleeve discussion. It requires a lot of hard sleeve to do that.
Bill, anything to add on that about getting big water out of older rigs or equipment that's on the older side?
Yeah, well maintained apparatus. It's a lot cheaper than buying a new apparatus. I know a lot of manufacturers don't want to hear that, but keeping that apparatus well maintained, putting that money into keeping the oil changed, replacing valves when needed. Yeah, you're going to be able to get just what the new ones will get. It'll get what it's designed to flow. If it's 1,000 gallons a minute, it is. As long as you're getting what it's designed to flow, I think it's a good apparatus to have. Andy mentioned 1,000 gallons a minute. That's what we strive for here as well. Usually, if you need more than 1,000 gallons a minute, that's a big fire and probably a big area. We can still achieve it over 1,000 gallons a minute. It's just going to be with a different apparatus. We're going to put them on the other side of the building and flow that way. Usually, if you're flowing no more than 1,000 gallons a minute, that's a big building, big fire. But yeah, older apparatus that's well maintained is just as good as the new ones are today.
Bill, I'm going to throw this one to you because you brought this up at FDIC during our podcast there, and I wanted to revisit it again. None of what we've talked about today is possible without a water source. So talk about the rural fire pre-planning. This was something that you mentioned was very important on your end of things when we were at FDIC. So just to elaborate on the points to be discussed with rural fire pre-planning.
Yeah, it doesn't take a lot of work to get into a vehicle and drive around your first due area and pick spots and know where those spots are. Have everyone on your department understand where those spots are, so that when we do have that fire 2 or 3 miles down the road, they're going to know exactly where the fill site is going to be. Is it? We might see a water a source and think we can get to it, but yet by pre-planning, we found out that it was too much of a lift. It was just over that threshold. So get out there and check your areas, find out where you have a wide open space. And then it may be a certain apparatus. If we have an apparatus that doesn't have a front intake where you can nose down to it, you may want to ask the mutual aid company coming in that has that front intake to hit that spot. And maybe instead of being the crew that comes in to assist the fire tech, they're going to be the ones that goes to the water source. We don't want to wait until the incident happens and then we're trying to figure out where our water source is. Then you're already behind the 8 ball at that point. So part of our job as firefighters, even when you're a volunteer firefighter, is being prepared for that run. That's why we train. That's why we go over everything with our new firefighters. It's the same thing with water sources. We need to pre-plan that and be prepared for those runs.
Andy, anything to add on the tips for pre-planning?
Yeah, no, Bill hit the nail on the head. The only thing that I would add is consider the fact that, at least I know that the departments that I ran with and worked for, typically the water sources that I would be pre-planning in my district, I probably wasn't going to be the one drafting out of, right? So once you pre-plan that stuff, compile it into something that you can give to your mutual aid partners. So that way they know, because they are more than likely, at least in my experience, they're going to be the ones that are going to be operating out of that source. So that's where we need to break down walls and have joint training and train together and look at these sources and actually figure out what is going to happen. So that way you have an idea, hey, if I'm going into Bill's district, I'm probably going to have to draft at their site located wherever. If Bill's coming to me, right, Bill might be that drafting engine, right?
Gotcha. Before I let you guys go, we're still, not too far removed from FDIC, and I just wanted to check in and see if there was anything that particularly caught your eye at FDIC. Bill, I'll start with you on this one. What caught your eye at FDIC that kind of got you juiced up a little bit?
One of the things that caught my eye was the HiCon. It was out there in Lucas Oil in the stadium there. It was originally on Shark Tank many years ago, It didn't succeed from that episode. They bought into it on the Shark Tank, but it just didn't catch on. But it's basically that it's a hydrant catcher we put on the end of of your supply hose, and it's a very quick quarter turn connection that connects to your hydrant instead of threading it all the way through there. I wrote a little article on it for fire apparatus and emergency equipment, and it's just something to check out.
Andy, how about you?
So I think staying on the theme of intake valves, I got really excited when I saw the Elkhart XD intake that they released. Really, really awesome looking valve. Nice large waterway. It can flow a lot of water. Some flow tests that we did, we were able to get 3,000 gallons a minute through it with a minimal amount of loss from a pressurized source. And then when we were drafting through that valve, we got about 1,452 gallons a minute from a draft. So just under that 1,500 GPM mark for a single intake from a draft. So I'm really impressed with it. I'm really excited to see it hit the street, and hopefully everybody enjoys it.
All right, Andy actually has a couple of things we need to promote here before you leave. First of all, we'll be doing a webcast with Andy, and then I think it's June 4th.
That's correct.
Is the webcast? It's going to be based on the class that you delivered at FDIC on rural water delivery. So we're looking forward to that. You can find out information on that at fireapparatusmagazine.com/webcasts. But Andy, why don't you talk just real quick about some of what you'll go over?
Yeah, so what we'll talk about, we're actually going to talk about the physics behind drafting, some of those lift principles and things that we kind of mentioned here. We'll talk about the importance of those intake valves. We're going to show you some alternative drafting techniques that don't require a primer. And we're going to get really into the importance of that multiple intake drafting, why that really has such a big impact on pumper performance, especially from a draft.
Okay, and again, that's fireapparatusmagazine.com/webcasts. Click on Andy's class, and you can register from there. Andy, you've also got a book. I don't want to forget about your book. Talk about your book real quick and how we can get it.
Yeah, so I'm honored to have a book published by Fire Engineering Books. I can't believe it's out, and I'm really excited. But book is titled "Water Thievery: The Art of Water Supply Operations." You can get it on fireengineeringbooks.com and order it there. But basically, it is it goes over all things water supply related. We spend a lot of time talking about rural water supply operations. We spend time talking about hydrant operations, advanced hydrant operations, how to supply aerial apparatus efficiently and effectively, and then some more advanced water supply tactics for delivering large volumes of water on your escalating incidents. We also talk a little bit about how to make the hydraulics and the hydraulic math for supply operations simple, where you're not, trying to bring a calculator and need an abacus and do all this kind of crazy stuff, and trying to make it to where it's simple but manageable and effective to where the operator will actually do it, because that's what it's about, right? That's what it's about. So I appreciate the support, and I'm really happy to see it out there, and hopefully it helps you and anybody that picks up a copy.
All right, just one more thing before I let you both go. I always end these things with just general comments. Bill, do you have any general comments for us based on everything that we talked about today?
Yeah, get out there, and when you're doing the training, that's where you find out what pieces of equipment that you need. There's been many times I've been out there, let's try this, and then we go to do it, and we don't have this adapter, and we don't have this, the right strainer. So make sure you get out there, and whatever system you're going to use, practice it so that you know that you have everything you need. And that includes your mutual aid companies. If you're going to be sending them to that fill site, make sure that they have what they need so that they don't have to go to the scene, pick up a piece of equipment, then go back to the fill site. So make sure you have everything you need before that incident happens.
Andy, how about you? Any final thoughts?
Yeah. So, as corny as it sounds, you're only limited by your imagination, right? So, and that's regardless of whether you're operating from a static body of water, or a hydrant, right? You're limited by your imagination. So, like Bill said, get out there and train and figure out what you need to do to be most efficient for these scenarios.
All right, perfect. Well, thanks again, guys, for joining me. I know, we really enjoyed actually sitting in the same room. We'll have to try to do that again soon. We'll have to try to coordinate that. But thank you again for joining me today in this. If there are topics that Andy and Bill haven't addressed yet that you'd like to see them address, please let us know. I'm at chris.mcclune@clarionevents.com. If you send me an email with the topic, we will definitely get them to talk about it. If you have one that is that we need to find another subject matter expert for, please let me know. Again, chris.mcclune@clarionevents.com. You can see all of our podcasts. They're all archived at fireapparatusmagazine.com/podcast. And again, fireapparatusmagazine.com/webcast. Make sure you take a look there. We've got a couple of webcasts coming up that are that one's on one we're going to talk about some ventilation, and of course Andy's is going to talk about water supply. So again, Andy, Bill, my thanks to you for sitting down with me today. Again, this has been Chris McClune with Fire Apparatus and Emergency Equipment. Have a good one and stay safe. Thanks again, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
This podcast is brought to you by the National Fallen Firefighters Foundation. Their mission is to honor America's fallen fire heroes, support their families, colleagues, and organizations, and work to reduce preventable firefighter death and injury. Learn more at firehero.org.